What it do, Dream Team? It's your boy D Neal here with another video. This one we got a little something different. British Empire's most shocking historical event. And we got a warning for mature audiences only. Before we can dive into this event, make sure if you guys enjoy the video, you subscribe, ring notification bell, get the video a thumbs up. Let's check this out.
In August 2023, an entire race was resurrected. Declared extinct for over 40 years by the United Nations, and 150 years after their last known member had died, the Tasmanian Aborigines have proclaimed that they are back and strong. The chair of Tasmania's Aboriginal Heritage Council said with resentment that the UN's inaccuracy of declaring them extinct speaks of the long-standing mistreatment of Aboriginal people. Our people feel the sadness, the hurt. It's pretty typical of people in these positions. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. Today, on A Day in History, we explore a tale of violence and extermination that has been called the most shocking of all the chapters in the history of the British Empire, the genocide of the Tasmanian Aborigines, the Black War.
The Black War.
Today, 6,000 to 23,000 people identify themselves as Tasmanians. Their history goes a long way back and is quite unique. The first people arrived in Tasmania, a peninsula of Australia back then, 40,000 years ago. The region became an island around 6,000 years ago and was cut off from the Australian mainland. This resulted in the Tasmanian people becoming completely isolated from the rest of the world for nearly 8,000 years, until the arrival of the Europeans. While the first contact of the Palawa, as they named themselves, with European explorers took place in the 17th century.
So they lived in peace for 8,000 years. They lived isolated, which I'm sure they figured out how to survive in peace and how to live in peace, I assume. 8,000 years before these European ships came around.
It was only in 1803, with the first arrival of British colonists, that it became permanent. Back then, it was estimated that around 3,000 to 15,000 Palawa lived and prospered in this rich island. In 1855, their number was 14. And just as the Tasmanian Aborigines' story has been shaped by different perspectives, your personal data can be exploited in the digital age. Incogni, a survey.
They went from anywhere between 3 to 15,000 people within 45 years of these British ships arriving. They got cut down to 14. My God. We're going to skip this sponsor too. That's crazy. That's wild.
Safe from prying eyes. While pre-colonial populations, such as the Australian and Tasmanian Aborigines, are many times regarded as homogenous and are presented in popular culture as uncivilized, people of the Stone Age in many cases, the Palawa actually had developed an advanced society and an excellent relationship with their environment. When the British arrived, there were 9 separate nations and at least 48 clans living in Tasmania, having a complex relationship with their country. They had developed agriculture that secured them a rich diet. They demarcated their territories, had clear social hierarchies, and a sophisticated net of tribal relations. It is, of course, difficult to know specifics, because all of these functioning communal units were destroyed by the British.
Dang.
For the first colonists, the natives were considered primitive savages. They were friendly and harmless, but this was regarded more as a consequence of their subhuman nature. Killing them was regarded as insignificant because their existence essentially did not matter. They were just a nuisance in the spread of British civilization in this empty land.
That is why killing them was considered insignificant. And I don't know why we use this word savage. Like, when you think of savages, you think of people that are ruthless, people that, know what I'm saying? You don't. When I think of it, I guess. And so when they say that they were kind and nice and everything, then the word savage doesn't belong with it. But that's how the colonizers started them as British savage, or as now primitive savages.
The first recorded violent episodes between settlers and natives started only a few months after the first organized settlement was set. The episode in Risdon Cove on May 3, 1804 was the most significant, as it formed the relationship between the two communities for the next couple of decades. According to witnesses, a large group of Palawa, men, women, and children, appeared late morning on top of a hill behind a British outpost on a Kangaroo Drive. Although they did not threaten the settlement, the soldiers still fired at them, killing up to 50. This was the first of many such episodes. Sometimes colonists killed natives for fun. Examples of this are horrifying. Some settlers used to stick Palawa and fire at them as marks whilst alive. There were rumors that kangaroo hunters would shoot them to feed their dogs. Others kidnapped and raped women.
Kangaroo hunters would shoot them to feed their dogs. This is what I mean when I say humanity. And I'm not just talking about British Empire. I'm not talking about any specific group, but humanity. The evils that people are capable of is truly sickening, and it's truly mind-boggling how you can do this to someone. And I know they didn't look at them as people like them, so they thought they weren't doing anything wrong. But how you could do this to someone is truly like gut-wrenching and sickening. That's crazy.
Women after killing their husbands in front of them.
Wow.
In one such case, a settler abducted a married native woman, killed her husband when he came after them, cut off his head, and forced her to wear it slung around her neck in a bag as a plaything. Although such cases were well known in the small community of colonists and their authorities, no colonist was ever charged or committed for trial for assaulting or killing an Aboriginal person in the 30 years of the two communities' coexistence. The colonial authorities theoretically protected the Palawa under British law, but most of the time this came in contradiction with their first responsibility, which was to secure the existence of the colony. For the Palawa, this meant that they either had to just accept the new situation and assimilate into the settlers' society, which essentially meant becoming their slaves, or get murdered. Between 1817 and 1824, the colonial population rose from 2,000 to 12,600. And in 1823 alone, more than 1,000 land grants totaling almost 200,000 hectares were made to new settlers. By that year, Tasmania's sheep population had reached 200,000, and settled districts accounted for 30% of the island's total land area. This came, of course, at the expense of the Palawa communal lands. As a direct consequence of this, their population fell to around 5,000, about 50% of what it was 20 years before.
20 years, their population was cut in half.
The disaster that struck
It's just insanity. And I understand humanity has to progress. I mean, things have to be built. Progress has to be made. I understand. But I at the expense of people, I just can't agree with it. Because I'm sure there could have been another way for them to coincide and live in harmony. And they still be able to build all these things in progress, but not wipe out half a population within 20 years. That's just truly, I can't wrap my head around that. That's truly baffling.
Tasmanians intensified after 1824, with the arrival of a determined colonial governor, Sir George Arthur. Although Arthur's policies were marked by refined administrative methods and a genuine desire to protect the Tasmanians from settlers' brutality by placing them under British law, his ambition to create an ideal British colony, combined with a widespread disregard for Palawa culture, led to organized conflicts between colonists and natives. These conflicts, known as the Black War, a term with clear racial implications coined in the 1830s, are now being reconsidered by scholars, who suggest using the term Tasmanian War instead. By the mid-1820s, the two communities essentially lived in separate worlds, except for some hunting and sexual relationships. For Tasmanians, British law meant nothing. The whole land was theirs, and nothing could take it from them. For the British, on the other hand, the land was theirs by law, and the British authorities had the right to enforce the situation on everybody living in what was considered their territory. There was no way these two views could be conciliated.
Well, I said they could coincide in harmony and figure it out, but I guess that statement was completely wrong. I guess the Aborigines were there first. So it makes sense for them to think why the whole land has been theirs for thousands of years. And for somebody to just come in and say, all right, this is our land. Yeah, it's actually crazy if you think about it. But the British, conquering and conquest has happened since the beginning of time. People have had their land taken from them. And so this situation was no different, where the British came in and said, this is our land now. And either you're going to live under our law, or you can't be here anymore. It's just tough. It sucks. It truly, truly sucks.
Under British law, the Aborigines were treated as second-class citizens.
Well, see, I understand why they wouldn't want to live under British law then, because nobody wants to live like that. Any people that get their land colonized or conquered are gonna absolutely be treated like second-class citizens, or are gonna absolutely hate the people who colonized or conquered the land. It's just a sucky situation. It's an absolute sucky situation, and I don't know what to say.
For example, could get away with murder, whereas they could not.
See, that's crazy.
They could not be sworn into British courts and were barred from giving testimony, which meant that in many cases their sufferings were never officially recorded. This structural imbalance between the two communities was maybe not reflected in the kind words of the colonial governor, but can be understood very well by the escalation of his policies against the natives. By 1826, the violence coming from the natives had become more frequent and more brutal. One settler's body was found transfixed with many spears, and his head dreadfully shattered with blows, inflicted either with stones or waddies. Arthur responded to such cases by allowing settlers to kill natives when their property was threatened, treating such incidents similarly to acts of aggression by another state. By referring to the natives as a state, Arthur willingly or unwillingly changed their status from people protected by British law to potential enemies. It was an unofficial declaration of war, and it only led to further deterioration of the conflict. In 1828, with battles between the two communities becoming more and more severe, Arthur proclaimed the existence of two different territories on the island, with the Palawa allowed to live in the northeast region, which had not yet been colonized, and the settlers given the rest. Although this may have seemed fair to the British, it essentially meant that every time natives tried to approach their traditional land, they could be murdered without consequences. Interestingly, the proclamation first made the admittance that it was the white settlers who had initiated the struggle by using violence against the natives. But the essence of the declaration lay in its conclusion. I do hereby strictly command and order all Aborigines immediately to retire and depart from, and for no reason and on no pretense, save as hereinafter provided, to re-enter such settled districts, or any portions of land cultivated and occupied by any person whomsoever, on pain of forcible expulsion therefrom, and such consequences as may be necessarily attendant on it. This proclamation, of course, meant nothing to the natives, who could not read and understand English.
So, you can't impose these laws on people who don't understand. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Even if they wanted or were willing to follow the law, they couldn't, because they couldn't understand what the law was, because you're speaking a language that they don't understand. This is crazy.
And had no idea of the British legal language and its exquisite ways of legalizing murder. Not recognizing the newly founded borders, they kept regarding the violation of their lands as theft, and their attacks intensified, taking more sophisticated forms of a guerrilla war targeting sheep and huts, and killing civilians. The countermeasures by the settlers were disproportional. They were ambushing groups of natives at night and brutally killed the men, raped the women, and abducted their children.
Oh my God.
It has been estimated that 10, perhaps 20 natives were killed for every one European.
My God.
The last play in the drama of the Black War was the so-called Black Line, an incident that would be hilarious if it did not hide so much suffering and killing behind it. To effect a permanent end to that conflict, in October 1830, the government led the settlers in a military operation against the natives. The Black Line was an attempt to confine the surviving population to a very small portion of the island by encircling them, but it was also a means to exterminate them. The move took the form of an immense pheasant drive. According to Arthur, every white man on the island, including settlers, convicts of the penal colony, constables, and soldiers, joined in it, with the most zealous and cheerful alacrity. The main line of hunters stretched across 2/3 of the island, from St. Patrick's Head on the east coast to Quamby Bluff on the western tiers. It was supported by 2 flanking lines, one in the east and the other in the southwest, to catch any Palawa who slipped by the ends of the main line. Some 2,200 men formed the line. They carried between them 1,000 muskets, 30,000 rounds of ammunition, and 300 pairs of handcuffs to capture the resistant natives. They started their glorious parade on October 7th, 1830, and walked towards each other near what they imagined must have been the center of the Palawa operations. The spectacle must have looked absurd from every angle.
I can imagine.
Few more than 2,000 people trying to encircle an island as large as Ireland, to catch people who have lived there for generations and knew every corner, every path, and every tree. It took them...
I guess when you think about it like that, yeah. I mean, the Aborigines had a home field advantage. Even if you think your strategy would work, they know everything there is to know about the land. They've lived there for thousands of years.
7 weeks to complete the move. And in the end, when the net was finally closed, the truth was revealed. The net was empty. During the campaign, only a few Palawa were spotted. 2 of them were shot and 2 were captured. The rest just flew through the vast gaps between the lines of the pursuers. But what must have been one of the most ridiculous extermination campaigns in history soon revealed a truth that transformed it into a victory. The primary reason no Palawa were found was that so few remained alive. In the following months, attacks by the natives dwindled to a minimum, and by 1831, the remaining Palawa, numbering around 700, were forced to surrender.
700. Before they got there, almost 15,000.
From a thriving population of around 10,000 in 1803 then,
10,000.
only 7% remained in 1831.
Jesus.
It would be 0.5% 20 years later, completing an event that truly merits the term genocide. But after the end of the Black War and the realization that the Palawa were no more a real threat to the colony, Arthur's policy changed from one of aggression to one of pacification. The pacifier was a British emigrant called George Augustus Robinson. Robinson was very interested in the Palawa and wanted to bring them into civilization and Christianity. In contacting the Palawa, Robertson had a very useful assistant, a Palawa named Trucanini. As a child, Trucanini had seen her mother stabbed to death in a night raid. Later, a sealer kidnapped 2 of her tribal sisters and her blood sister and took them into slavery. She lost her stepmother in the same way. Finally, around 1828, settlers captured the boat she was in with her betrothed and other men and threw them overboard. When they tried to haul themselves up, they chopped their hands off and left them to sink. They then rowed her ashore and raped her. Having lost everyone, she became dependent on the settlers' community, and she was the one now calling her tribesmen to leave the island for their safety. Following Robertson, the Palawa were persuaded to leave the land of their ancestors and were relocated to nearby Flinders Island. They were promised a peaceful life there, supported by Europeans who would help integrate them into Western culture. However, the reality was starkly different. The island was unsuitable for sustaining life, and the Palawa were essentially confined to a concentration camp and abandoned by the colonists. Although they were allowed to buy and sell goods to develop a sense of property and were even permitted to have their own police, these concessions were meaningless. In reality, they were left to die. By 1835, only 150 Palawa remained. By 1843, that number had dwindled to 54. In 1855, only 14 were left, 3 men and 11 women.
That is legit utterly shocking. Like, the entire population basically taken out.
The last man to die was mutilated and exhumed for study. His skeleton and skull ultimately lost. The last woman, Trucanini, died in 1876. Even after her death, her sufferings continued. Her body was desecrated, and her skeleton was displayed in the Tasmanian Museum as an exhibit, only to be removed in 1947. The extermination of the Aboriginal Tasmanians was not a secret to the British. In the 1820s and 1830s, people talked of the extirpation of this community as an understandable fact. This narrative was important for the British and their understanding of their position in the world. In a historical period where the term genocide was unknown and the civilizational superiority of the West was unquestioned, the idea that the all-powerful British Empire could sweep helpless savages from history was repeated over and over. This was seen as the British complementing the work of nature to preserve the strong and eliminate the weak. The extermination was both physical and cultural, rooted in a profound sense of superiority and a complete disregard for cultural differences. Defenders of the British Empire have correctly noted that there was no official order from British authorities to exterminate the Palawa. On the contrary, Arthur and other British officials attempted to protect them under British law. However, this is only part of the story. Imposing an unfamiliar legal system on the Palawa was an act of cultural genocide, forcing British values upon unsuspecting natives. This declaration of total annihilation concealed an arrogant spirit of superiority, fueled by the triumph over the weak and foreign. But the Tasmanians survived. In 2023, the UN renounced its previous proclamation that they were extinct. Their culture, languages, and traditions may have been lost, but descendants of them still exist, since many Palawa women bore children to European men. They are proof of one of the most brutal colonial acts, an act that is by many regarded as the most undisputed case of genocide committed by the British Empire.
That's crazy, bro. That legit shook me. Like, y'all let me know what y'all think in the comment section. Oh my God. I mean, like I said, since the beginning of time, there were people who wanted to expand their empires and wanted to conquer as much land as possible and then cultivate the land and over time progress the land, and the people who were there before them, unfortunately, they didn't matter. And that, like I said, that's not just the British Empire. That's every empire that's ever survived throughout humanity. It just sucks. It sucks because it's like, man, I can't imagine going through those kind of atrocities, living through that kind of terror. And what do you do? What do you do? Y'all talk to me in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. That's all we got for this video. If you enjoyed that reaction, make sure you check out that one next, like immediately. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Ring notification bell. Get the video a thumbs up. It's your boy Neal. Out.